Hello, good afternoon and good evening to all. I would like to welcome you to the webinar Integrating Telerik Tests in Visual Studio and would like to begin with an introduction of myself. I am Arvindan, a QA professional with 18 years of experience, and I am an Associate Vice President for Automation at Indium. My team is responsible to provide effective solutions to our customers' automation problems. With this introduction, I would like to move on to our topic, integrating the Telerik tests in Visual Studio. As a part of our today's agenda, we will be going through a bit of introduction to the Telerik Test Studio, followed by how we run the tests in Telerik Test Studio, followed by introduction of Visual Studio and the challenges in introduction. Finally, run the tests in Visual Studio, and we'll have demos for running the tests in Telerik Studio as well as running those tests on Visual Studio. So Telerik Test Studio is a Windows-based. Needless to say, it works only on Windows. We don't have support for other tools, other operating systems. It's an automation tool for web and desktop. And it also comes with a plugin available for Visual Studio, and there is a standalone application using which we can create our tests. And this standalone application that we're talking about is it's a framework on its own. So there's a defined structure the framework follows, and we can add the tests in the defined structure. When it comes to what the Telerik Test Studio supports, it basically supports the functional testing, performance testing, which includes load and stress, and also supports mobile application testing for those that are developed using Telerik controls. And it basically uses two languages. One is C# and the other one VB.NET. Some of the applications supported by this tool would be any HTML5 application. It could be built on any of the scripting languages like ASP, PHP, JSP, or any. We don't. As long as it's a HTML5 application, it works fine. It also works on Ajax, Silverlight, ASP.NET MVC, JavaScript, and WPF. And it supports all the popular HTML5 enabled browsers. We mentioned some of the browsers here. And it comes with some of the key components of the Telerik Test Studio. Includes the Visual Debugger, DOM Explorer, Outlook, Output Plane, the Project Explorer, the test list pane, reports, etc. So what makes Telerik Test Studio special? First of all, it's QA friendly, and it has its own framework. So we can also leverage other unit testing frameworks like NUnit, MBUnit, XUnit, and also it integrates with external tools like Fiddler. But primarily it has its own framework that can be used, and there is a visual recorder for creating the user interface tests. It's a simple utility for creating or recording the tests and saving the tests and playing back multiple times. It has some intelligent element finding logics. If a particular element is dynamic in nature and the properties keep changing every time, the tool uses special techniques to identify those, and it avoids a lot of maintenance issue, and reusability of tests is promoted to a great extent in the framework. For the reporting, there is an email notification service and centralized results repository available in the tool, and we don't have to script, or we don't need any scripting language for automation, and it supports compatibility testing across multiple browsers. It also seamlessly integrates with Microsoft Build Server, Cruise Control, TeamCity, and other continuous integration tools. So here we see how we run the tests in Telerik Test Studio. Basically, we create a new project and record a business flow using one of the browsers. After we create the business flow, we play back the script on multiple browsers, and finally verify the results in the report. So here we see how do we record using the tool. So there's a record button here that can be used. I'm just selecting the highlighter here, and then we select what kind of application are we dealing with, whether it's a web load, WPF, or a manual test, and then we give it a name here. and finally click on create. Okay, now the test is created. After we create the test, or we have to select the test for execution and select this button, which is the execute. Once we do this, we'll have to select the browser. So we can select one of these browsers, Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome. There's an Edge browser support and also Safari support available within Windows, and click on run. And this is going to run the tests that were recorded in just one browser to run on multiple browsers. And this is the last step where we actually go through the report. So let's quickly see how this is carried out in Telerik Test Studio. So we already have a test that we created, and this was created using Firefox, and now we're going to run the same script that's created using Firefox on a different one. So we'll run the tests on Internet Explorer instead of Chrome. So we can see it's now navigating to the URL, and it filled in the form and exited out of the test. So we can run the same test on Firefox. It's going to be even more faster. So we can see it just in a jiffy completed the test. So we get step by step what happened at the time of execution. So how many tests were executed, how many were passed, what exactly were the operations that were carried out at every step. It's all listed here. So I'm going to close this and get back to our presentation. So we're going to see a little bit about Visual Studio. This is an IDE, as we all know, and an IDE from Microsoft, essentially for creating Microsoft-based applications. It supports Windows, WPF, web services, mobile applications, and so many other applications using Microsoft technology. When it comes to the supported languages, it supports C, C++, Visual C++, VB.NET, C Sharp, and F Sharp, some of the key languages used. And these are built in the framework, and there are some installable components like Python, Ruby, Node.js, and also support markup languages like XML, XSLT, HTML, XHTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And it comes with the core components includes the code editor and the debugger, and as a part of the designer, there's a forms designer, WPF designer, web designer, class data designers, mapping designer, and there are other tools also available as a part of Visual Studio. So coming to the key advantages of using Microsoft Visual Studio, so it's one, developer friendly, and comes with a set of easy to use tools. So anyone who's using Microsoft technology would be familiar with this Visual Studio, as opposed to using a new tool like Test Studio. The same tool can be used for the development needs and the testing needs that we have. So we don't have to depend on multiple tools, one for development, one for testing, etc. And it supports a variety of languages, the ones that we see under the support section, and we can create our own logics as opposed to the Telerik Studio. So here we can define reusable functions, create wrapper functions that can be used for the scripting. So there's a built-in testing framework, and we can customize the framework as per our need. We can create our own reporting components. We can create data-driven approach. We can just customize the framework for any need that we will have. It integrates seamlessly with source code, source control systems. So there are plugins available for different source control systems using which we can integrate and execute the scripts. Test management, execution, and the source control it supports integration with all these tools. And the best part is it can be unified for Windows-based objects and Telerik controls. So by this, what we mean is we don't need two separate frameworks, one for Telerik controls and the other one for non-Telerik controls. So we can just have one platform that will work seamlessly on Windows-based as well as Telerik controls. Here are the steps we perform in order to integrate with Visual Studio. So basically have to first install the Visual Studio and go to the Tools menu and select the option extensions and updates. And there's a checkbox for online that's available, so we need to check it and search for Telerik Test Studio and click on the download. So this will download the installer, and we can install Telerik Test Studio. We can select the Visual Test Studio plugin and click complete. So that's going to take us through the completion of the process. So coming to the key challenges while we integrate the Telerik Studio with Visual Studio, whether we use it or not, the Telerik Test Studio IDE will be installed, and that's going to be a core component for executing the tests. So it is going to be installed. At least we will need a test runner license in order to execute the tests, and we need to install following a sequence of steps. We don't follow the steps, some of the components may not be identified, and we could run into compatibility issues when we have a mismatch with respect to 32-bit and 64-bit, so we need to take that extra care. And Telerik doesn't recommend parallel execution of tests for compatibility. So that's as per the documentation from Telerik, and only the elements that are visually seen or things that are available on the screen can be identified by the tool. So for example, if there is a grid and there is a scroll bar using which I need to scroll down to reach out to an element, there is a possibility that the element which is not seen when we don't scroll may not be identified. So we need to build some logics around it in order to make it identify. So here we see some of the steps involved in integration. So we start by searching for Telerik Test Studio, and we hit download after we locate the Telerik Test Studio. So after the integration, we come to the running of tests in Visual Studio. Here, whatever we followed in the Telerik Studio, same set of procedures can be followed for the playback of the scripts. And alternatively, we can create a framework and define a proper folder structure for the framework, organize our test cases in it, and we'll show one of the frameworks that we have created when we see the demo. There are some APIs available using which we can create the tests and run it, and there is always our option of running the tests using one of the unit testing frameworks like NUnit, MBUnit, VSUnit, XUnit, etc. And we can use the build NUnit test block using Test Studio API. So we always get the report just the way we saw on the Test Studio. So we will be seeing that shortly. Here we're just showing, so here we have a Telerik test and we select the test here, the project that's associated with it, and click OK. And we select the test has to be executed. We select the URL for execution and the browser on which it has to be executed. This is for the recording. So we click on record. The test recording is going to start. We're going to generate the script similar to what we had on the Telerik, and once the script is recorded, there's a play button here. This is used for executing the scripts that we created in Visual Studio. We can select the browser for execution and click run, and finally see the results in the log. We can move on to the demonstration of executing these scripts in Visual Studio. Sorry, we took some time in order to get the Visual Studio up here. So here we have a script that's ready-made, but we would like to show you something on the fly. We'll first execute this and show you this, and probably if time permits, we'll have a small demo of how we record the script. So we're going to start execution. We've selected Internet Explorer. It's now going to the test site. So the tests are complete. So we can view the log. We get to see what happened at the time of execution. So let's re-execute it on a different browser, Firefox this time. So the execution is done. So we're going to see similar results. We're not expecting any failures. Let me also quickly show you how we record a script using Visual Studio. So we right click here and add a new item, and it's going to be a test. It's a web test that we are adding here. So here is our record button. So we click on record, and we can select a URL here. We can key in our own URL, or we can select one of the recently used URLs, and select a browser where we are recording. So it is now it has launched the URL, so we can click on one of the links here, and we can see it's coming up with a breadcrumb kind of message that says it generated a step. So for every click, it generates a step, and we can see the steps getting generated. So we've just submitted it without completing the form, and so this is the control where we can pause or resume the recording. So it's paused now. So if we have to stop the recording, so we've closed the browser, and it has stopped the recording. So now we can execute the tests. Let's select a different browser, Firefox. So we can see whatever we keyed in was all executed. So one good thing about using Visual Studio is whatever tests that we create can be edited. So it creates a line of code for every step. So we have a total control. We can create reusables using the code, and we can call these wherever it is required. So I would like to show you one of the frameworks that we have created. So we have our in-house framework called iSafe. We're going to see that. So here is a sample framework. There's a data folder where we have the test cases listed and the test data associated with the tests, and there is a framework folder for the driver script. And we create some application specific keywords, generic keyword library, uh, especially for the reusable functions. We also have placeholders for the logos that appear in the results. There's a modules where, depending on the application modules, we create folders, multiple folders for different purposes, and we place all our module-specific class files inside these. There's an object repository, which is a placeholder for the UI elements. If there is some kind of change to one of the UI object, we don't have to uh, do any changes on the scripts. We modify that in the object repository, and it gets reflected everywhere on the scripts. We also have this test case file and the test driver. Driver is our driver script which triggers the execution, and the test case is that's a place where we sequence the test cases. Apart from these, we have some utility functions specific to different purposes. There's a Excel sheet reader, writer, there's an output log generator, XML report creator, and some common actions that we've defined at the framework level. And we use XSL transformation for creating the test reports in HTML format or PDF format or XML format from the XML dump that we get from the Visual Studio. Let me also show one of the reports, the XSL transformation report. So this is how our sample report looks. So how many test cases were executed, how many passed, failed, etc. And out of the failures, how many were low severity test cases, medium, high severity cases. And when we click on the test case, we get to see what happened in those test cases. We can also see a screenshot of the failure. So we can see that in here. So let me open one of the passing test cases. So this is one of the passing test case. So whatever steps that are generated looks pretty similar to the functional test cases. We can just easily correlate to a manual test case. So with that introduction, we're switching back to the demonstration. So here's a quick snapshot of whatever we walked you through in the last few minutes. So by now you should have a basic understanding of the Visual Studio, the Telerik Studio, and the steps involved in integration and the key challenges we have in the integration process. We also saw a bit about the running of tests in Visual Studio and Telerik Test Studio. One important aspect that I would like to touch base here is the cost reduction by leveraging more number of Telerik Test Studio runner licenses. So, these runner licenses cost less, and we can use these for executing our tests on demand. So, now I would like to let the forum open for questions. So you can type your questions to me. I'll be more than happy to answer those. So just in case if you don't know where to type the questions, there's a questions tab underneath. You can just type in your questions. So here is the first question. Will there be any issues if we install Telerik Studio first and Visual Studio next? Yes, of course, there will be some challenges because when we install Telerik Studio first and then install the Visual Studio, what happens is we would have not configured the Telerik Studio plugin in Visual Studio. So probably that is an important step. If that is missed, it's not going to work correctly. I'm just trying to maximize this questions pane. I'm getting more questions here. So only the newer version can have Test Studio. So I'm not getting exactly what you're asking, but this Test Studio, it comes with all versions of Visual Studio above 2010. So small correction here, it's available in 2012 and above. Can we build our own framework using Telerik? That's a good question again, but Telerik doesn't come with a lot of flexibility for customizations. So we can say we can customize the Telerik scripts by 20 to 30%, but we cannot create a custom framework out of Telerik Test Studio. So you mentioned about Telerik test runner. Could you please explain about it? So there are two types of licenses available for the Telerik Test Studio. One is the Test Studio license, and the other one is the Test Runner. The Test Runner license doesn't cost much compared to the Telerik Test Studio licenses. Only drawback with the Test Runner license is that we'll have to we can only execute the scripts that are already created using the runner. So we cannot create new ones using the runner. So if we already have the scripts for executing those scripts, then you know we can use the test runner. So basically, I see one more question here from Ramesh. How exactly will this reduce cost? Can you explain about it? So the way we reduce cost is by leveraging more on the test runner licenses. So if the runner licenses are costing just about 25% of what the Telerik Studio is going to cost, we can buy 4 licenses of test runner and use these for executions. And just for the creation, we can have minimal number of licenses that's required for the test creation. Is Silverlight automation possible in Telerik Studio? Does it have full support? I think that's a question outside of the scope, but just to answer it, yes, Silverlight is supported by Telerik Studio, and it has complete support for all the Silverlight controls. Hope you found this session useful. Thanks for your time. We'll be sending this webinar link to your email shortly. Thank you again.